Yo, this new Bitwise report might explain why Bitcoin is about to explode. It highlighted that public companies now hold over 688,000 Bitcoin. And the crazy part about all of that is that one man, Michael Saylor, currently owns more Bitcoin than every single nation state combined. Will the nation state FOMO that Michael created be the catalyst that helps Bitcoin explode to 250K? We'll find out. Saylor currently owns 500,000 Bitcoin, and there's only enough Bitcoin on exchanges for 4 nation states to buy more than him. I think it's literally physically impossible for anyone to catch up to Michael Saylor at this point. He has first mover advantage, and even if someone tries, I think that's just going to make the price go absolutely parabolic. Before we jump into today's discussion, I do want to bring legendary co-host, always optimistic Fields, and our special guest for today. We got Svetski in the house. We're going to be talking about his new book, and it's going to be a great show. Anyways, guys, before we jump into today's discussion, let me pull up let me pull up some of this data. So, Bitcoin treasuries, and we'll just go down the list. So, of course, you have Michael Saylor, MicroStrategy, or better said, it's called Strategy now, leading the pack with 528,000 Bitcoin. You have Mara Holdings with 47,000. You have Riot Platforms with 19,223. And Saylor seems like he's continuing to buy. This just dropped this morning. Strategy buys $555 million worth of Bitcoin, increases total stash to 538,000 BTC. The company has spent 36.47 billion on Bitcoin to date and remains the largest corporate holder of BTC. So it goes on to say Strategy has added 656 Bitcoin to its balance sheet, spending $555 million in the process. The purchase was funded using proceeds from the company's 2 at-the-market stock offerings, the filing notes. It continues to say corporate Bitcoin holdings, in another article, let's check it out from Bitcoin Magazine. Our boy Nick Hoffman wrote it. Corporate Bitcoin holdings hit record high in Q1 of 2025 as public companies accelerate accumulation. It goes on to say Bitcoin adoption by public companies has reached an all-time high, according to a new report from Bitwise. In Q1 2025, publicly traded firms now hold a combined over 688,000 BTC, up 16.11% quarter over quarter, representing 3.28% of Bitcoin's fixed 21 million supply. So here are some of the stats. Corporate Bitcoin adoption Q1 25, 688,000 BTC, 57 billion, worth 57 billion, and an increase of 17.91% quarter over quarter. I mean, this is all great and this is all fine. You know, I think we're seeing all this bullish news like from the nation state level, from the institutional adoption level. Wall Street is now involved. But my first question to you, Svetski, is why isn't this reflected in the price? What the F is going on? I mean, you have this mass scale Bitcoin adoption. It seems like companies, countries, you have the orange man going up basically saying, hey guys, the US wants to buy as much Bitcoin as possible. But still, why hasn't number gone up? Has it been captured by Wall Street? Svetski.
I mean, you're asking the wrong guy. I guess my best estimate is that there's so much paper Bitcoin out there and derivatives and all the sort of fake scammy shit that you can do wonders with prices these days. But who knows, man? I'm just looking at the site now, and Jesus, like he's got 10x, more than 10x the nearest, which is Mara. So it's massive, man. I mean, I guess isn't MicroStrategy technically a proxy for like the CIA or the US government? I don't know. So,
I mean, that Bitcoin is custody with Coinbase. It's just one big giant honeypot. But do you think it is that? Do you think it's the whole paper aspect of it? Do you think?
I don't know. Go.
You don't know? No.
I was gonna say I don't know what else it could be. Like, I mean, how else does? I mean, we sort of pride ourselves on like supply demand economics, kind of, we're all armchair Austrian economists and stuff like that. So like it would make sense in a world in which you have X amount of demand and, Y amount of supply, that the price should reflect that. I don't fucking know, man.
No, I mean, I think that's a really good point, right? Which is, like, I mean, no one, like, why hasn't the price gone up? I think that's a question on everyone's mind, is why hasn't the price gone up? I remember we had Jameson Lop on last week, Svetski, and we asked him the same thing. Lop's been in the industry for a long time, and he literally said, he's like, I don't know, man. I'm in a bunch of these Telegram chats, and all these people know, like, all these people have been in the industry for a while, and no one has any idea what's happening. That was his like verbatim response.
Yeah, I think it's got something to do with the fact that most of the buying happens on exchanges, and I'm pretty sure most of the shit that's happening on exchanges is paper. And I think we have a clear epidemic of more Bitcoin than there actually is. And then at some point that peg breaks, and then you get Bitcoin pumps. I mean, that's the best I can estimate.
All right, that's a good take. Opti, what about you? Thoughts, ideas, feelings?
I mean, I think the first point here is like not to call Svetski an OG here, but Svetski's been in Bitcoin longer than I have, and we brought up the Jameson Lop example. I think we can all kind of agree that none of us know what's going on right now, but something is going on that no one can really pinpoint. And I think that might be the signal for all of us, especially, if you're newer to Bitcoin. There is a huge influx of people coming into Bitcoin from like 2020, 2022, et cetera. And everyone's kind of trying to figure out like what is going on, because from all the amount of Bitcoin or, supposed Bitcoin that is being bought right now, it doesn't make sense to any single one of us. Like that Bitwise report says 688K Bitcoin are in corporation balance sheet, and that's not even accounting for like the million plus coin that is supposedly in all of the ETFs. So like if you think about just simple demand supply economics here, like for all of us here, it should be ripping. That's like the main signal we're all kind of been seeing. It's like this just makes no sense to us. And I remember having a conversation with Dante, and we were all wondering, like, dude, it's either that there is a bunch of paper Bitcoin that it isn't accounted for, because the amount of Bitcoin that is supposedly being bought, like, it doesn't make sense. Like, where are they getting all this Bitcoin? Who's selling all this Bitcoin? And then, of course, we've been seeing that there has been allegedly a bunch of nation states selling Bitcoin. We don't know what's going on with the U.S. Bitcoin, the 200,000 that the U.S. holds. We getting some news that China's kind of dropping some Bitcoin. So it's going to be very interesting once we get a bunch of clear information of where all this Bitcoin's coming from. I know Checkmate has kind of been talking about and showing on-chain data saying that long-term OG holders are selling some Bitcoin. So all of these factors are kind of playing out with like, no one really knows what's going on with the Bitcoin price right now. It seems that there's probably going to be some kind of paper Bitcoin blow up. But when you kind of go into the story of like Saylor owns more Bitcoin or Strategy owns more Bitcoin than I think it's like all the nation states combined, like this is insane. Like he's going to be the emperor god of planet Earth soon if Bitcoin starts ripping. And whether this is a good thing or a bad thing, I think none of us can actually tell. But the amount of Bitcoin that Strategy has been able to scoop up at these price points is just absolutely insane. And Nico and I and every one of our guests that we brought on the show, we've all been kind of asking the same question. Is it even physically possible or realistically possible for anyone to acquire as much Bitcoin as Strategy? Are they going to forever be the leaders of, Bitcoin holdings? And then, of course, that's not even taking into account this whole like honeypot idea that all of us are talking about. It's like most of that Bitcoin's in Coinbase. A lot of us don't like Coinbase. Like there's a lot of questions to be answered. And I think we will find some answers soon enough. Obviously, I don't want to see these honeypots blow up, because that would turn back our industry probably for like a decade. It would just be detrimental to everything we're doing here. So I don't think they're that dumb to actually, do insane rehypothecations, but it's not above board of what's going on. It does seem like there's a lot of paper Bitcoin, and this is why we constantly tell everyone, look, I know the plebs out there, the laymen out here, like we don't have enough capital to even compete with like a Saylor or a BlackRock or whatever, but what you need to be doing is taking your Bitcoin off these exchanges. Call their bluff right now. Make sure you're holding your Bitcoin. You do not want to be leaving anything on an exchange. You don't want to get yourself rug pulled, but something is going on in the market right now. I've been saying for a while, maybe it's this idea that like the nation states or billionaires or whatever, the FUD playbook of they're trying to suppress the price so that they can accumulate a good position before it starts running. And then you factor in all the macroeconomic uncertainty we're seeing in the markets and everything. It's like we're in a crazy time. And I hate to keep repeating this idea that like we're in a new paradigm, but it does seem like we're in a new era in Bitcoin. Bitcoin is maturing. It's becoming this quote unquote macro asset. Like Bitcoin is growing up, and part of that will come some, pains and bumps, and it's not going to work out exactly as we've all thought it's going to. But I still think, Bitcoin is going to do what Bitcoin does. It's doing extremely well in the current macro landscape, and it's just an opportunity for you to buy. Yeah, jump in, Svetski.
I was just gonna say there's maybe another explanation which is not so straightforward, which is I think our perception of time has been skewed. After you and I were saying this before we came on, before we came live, was the world now is just slop and hysteria. Basically, it's like some mixture of slop and hysteria, and that's every single social media, every single news channel, every single everything. And I think what that does is it distorts your perception of time. I was on Liberty Lockdown the other week, and Clinton was like, when's Trump going to do this, and this? And I was like, he's only been in like 3 months. Isn't that right? Like we expect so much more to happen because we're bombarded with so many things. So maybe just maybe the price of Bitcoin is actually going up at the correct pace based on the amount of accumulation, the amount of things being bought and sold, etc. So I'm trying to like steelman the non-paper argument here. Basically, maybe that is actually happening, but our perception of time is so warped that we're like a bunch of children now that want everything now. When in reality, like the pump is maybe a month away, and these sort of supply-demand dynamics take a moment to sort of like hit and come through. So maybe that's another potential explanation. I don't know if that.
Yeah, and no, Svetski, I think I agree. Especially today, the Bitcoin price is kind of pumping right now. I know for us Bitcoiners, it's like, okay, whatever, it went up a couple $1,000s. It's like not a big deal. But I think you might be right. And I think I've been saying this for a while. I think we are so entitled with, Bitcoin price runs. We do, we talk about Bitcoin a lot, like lower your time preference. But when it comes to the price, we all get impatient. We're like, yo, why isn't it ripping right now? And watch by the end of the year, it like rips, and we're going to just be, losing our shit on Twitter and everywhere else because it's finally ripping. But in the Max Payne scenario, like this does feel like the Max Payne scenario where it's like a very like gruesome grind up, and then finally it starts ripping, and we're like, okay, it's doing exactly what we thought. But our time experience here is very, very distorted. I would totally agree with that.
Okay, but hold on a second. So I agree with you. I think we're getting essentially bombarded via social media. Our dopamine receptors are just being completely hijacked.
Right. Yep.
And we're just getting so much like news. It's this endless scroll of just information. You think the world is ending. You go outside, you put your phone down. It's like, oh no, it's just a beautiful day at the beach like every other day. I completely agree with you. However, from just a price performance perspective, Svetski, I think this cycle has definitely underperformed to a lot of people's expectations. And I think if you've been in Bitcoin for a while, expectations are terrible to have because Bitcoin does the exact opposite of what everyone thinks. And it takes a path of maximum pain every single time. But I can't look at the wine. I can't look at the computer and look at the camera wine. I can't do both. I'm going to do something like that. I mean, what's your take on this current cycle? Like, do you not care? Are you in build mode? You're focusing on, your book. You're focusing on your family. You're not necessarily taking a look at the Bitcoin price because I think you have a copy and I don't have a copy. How does that work?
I bought mine because I support my boy here. I'm a capitalist enjoyer.
Okay. All right. I'm going to buy a copy right now while we do this. But yeah, man, I mean, what's your take on just the current cycle? Are you just so plugged up? Like you just don't care, Svetski. You're just laser focused on what you're doing, on what you're building. You just don't care. Do you think Bitcoin's doing what it should? Svetski.
Okay, let me say a couple things there. So yes, I'm laser focused. Yes, I'm building. Yes, I'm on all of that sort of stuff. And that doesn't mean though that I don't notice the Bitcoin price, because the Bitcoin price has a significant impact on my personal runway and the things I want to do and the opportunities that it opens up and everything, right? So And you know, it's that perpetual feeling of the meme, right? You know, Bitcoin first hits 80 grand and you think you're fucking Rockefeller, and then it hits 100 and then it comes back to 80 and you think you're a fucking pauper, right? Even though 2 months ago it was the same price and you thought you were the best, right? So, you know, it does, there's, I think, to really be numb to that, I think you probably have to be in Bitcoin more than 10 years. And I'm about to hit the 10-year mark. Next year will be my 10th year in Bitcoin. And it's you know, becoming more and more numbing. That being said, you know, we hold some Bitcoin in treasury in the business, and the higher the Bitcoin price goes, the longer our runway. So I want the thing to increase, and it is frustrating. I'm sitting here thinking, motherfucker, this should be at 200K. I should be in a better financial position personally with business, all this sort of thing. But then I kind of wonder the people who, you know, the lops of the world, who have actually been around an extra cycle or two, and for them, you know, because we all have this kind of like cycle in our mind in which we become fundamentally like, okay, I'm financially free. I don't have to work fucking ever again. And no amount of work that I do now is going to increase the amount of Bitcoin that I hold to a reasonable degree, right? So at like 250,000 Bitcoin, if you earn, say, $100,000 a year for a decent paying job, and you can save like 20, 30% of your paycheck, at 250K Bitcoin, you're going to add 10 million sats in a year. It's kind of like fuck all. Like, and especially if you have, you know, double digit or triple digit Bitcoin or whatever, like that amount is not going to change your life. So at some point, you actually don't care, and you actually probably sell your Bitcoin. So I wonder the people that are in the era or the cycle before me and before us, before any of us here, whether for them 80K versus 100K doesn't mean anything, and for them they're actually, you know, dumping Bitcoin because now they, like, for them, the time or the stage of life for them. So let's say you're 50 years old and you're like, you know what, right now, enjoying this matters more to me than saving it for, you know, the difference between 100K and 250K for me means nothing because I can't ever spend all of my money anyway. So I wonder if that is actually a way that some of this is, you know, there's real suppression on the price. I guess I'm trying to blend two ideas here. Is one, I'm not entirely numb. I want it to go up, and it is frustrating because I haven't reached the stage at which I am completely free. And I wonder if those who that have come before us are part of the reason why we don't see Bitcoin coming onto market, because, you know, those early OGs, man, like they were buying Bitcoin at $100. Like if you bought Bitcoin at $100, like 80 grand Bitcoin is pretty fucking good. So I don't know.
Absolutely. That's a really good point. Yeah. And I think a lot of people underestimated that, right? Because I mean, and then especially if you've been holding from $100 to $100,000, that's more than 100x. That's a ridiculous return on your investment, right? Yeah. And then all the emotions that you've had to feel along the way. Because, you know, this isn't, I mean, holding is easy in theory, but in practice, it's you know, it's definitely very painful to say the least. Anyways, guys, we have a jam-packed show for you guys. We're going to be talking about a variety of things. It seems like the Federal Reserve and Donald Trump are going head to head. I'm going to be asking Svetski about what his thoughts are on the Fed and about central banking in general. I kind of already know them, but I want you guys to hear it. And then we have a video of Samson Mow, who's been ultra bullish, mega bullish, super bullish. He had an interview with Stefan Livera at the Plan B Forum in El Salvador. I have a clip of him talking about how 500K Bitcoin isn't crazy. I mean, it doesn't feel like that right now. Obviously, you know, that we're kind of going sideways. You know, a lot of people had higher expectations, but, you know, it's good to just play these types of videos sometimes and just, you know, continue these conversations. And then during the culture segment, we have a very special guest today. We have Svetski in the house. I just bought the hardcover copy of his book, The Bushido of Bitcoin, A Code of Virtue for a World on a New Economic Standard. We're going to to be talking about that during the culture segment. It's going to be an incredible show. Smash that like button if you guys are enjoying it so far. We are at currently 86 likes, so help us break 150 likes within the first 30 minutes of the show. And we're on the verge of breaking 500 live viewers on YouTube. So smash that like button if you guys are enjoying the content. Really, really helps with the algos. And of course, shout out to the YouTube and Rumble audience as well. 2,000 of you guys watching live. Before we jump into today's show, I do want to give a shout out, of course, to Simply sponsor. Simply would not be possible without our partners. So if you guys want to support the show, check out our partners, and we're very, very picky on who we choose to partner with. So I do want to give a shout out to Bitcoin Well. Buy real Bitcoin, enable your independence with the fastest and safest way to buy Bitcoin on chain or via the Lightning Network in Canada and the USA. To get started, you put in your email address here. It takes 2 to 5 minutes to get signed up. What makes Bitcoin Well different is that it's a non-custodial platform. What does that mean? That means that when you buy Bitcoin on Bitcoin Well, as soon as the funds clear, it goes straight to your self-custody Bitcoin wallet address. If you're a higher net worth individual looking to buy $50,000 worth of Bitcoin or more, check out Bitcoin Well Infinite. To get started, go to bitcoinwell.com/OTC. You'll have a dedicated account representative. Every time you want to buy or sell Bitcoin, you can call this person, you can text this person, and they'll be able to take care of it for you. Check out bitcoinwell.com today. And if you go to bitcoinwell.com/simply, you get 3 opportunities to win up to 1 million Satoshis just for signing up. So go to bitcoinwell.com/simply today. All right, everybody, let's get to numbers. We have tons to talk about. We'll be right back. I want to tell you guys about our sponsor, Stampseed. Is your Bitcoin in cold storage really secure? Are your seed words really secure? Stampseed's do-it-yourself kit has everything you'll need to hammer your seed words into commercial-grade titanium plates instead of writing them down on paper. Don't do that. Paper sucks. You want to literally stamp your seed into this plate of titanium. Your words are actually stamped into the metal plate with this hammer. So once your words are in, they aren't going anywhere. No risk of the plate breaking apart and your pieces falling everywhere. Titanium stamp seeds will survive nearly triple the heat produced by a house fire. They are also crush-proof, waterproof, non-corrosive, and most importantly, because this is generational wealth, time-proof. All things that paper is not, allowing you to hodl your Bitcoin for the long haul. I mean, here is the plate that they crushed. They put in water, they put a blowtorch to it, and as you can see, the words have survived. Stamp your seed on Stampseed. And you can use promo code SIMPLY to get 15% off anything on their store. Head over to stampseed.com today. All right, everybody, we are back. At the time of recording, the Bitcoin price is $87,300. Block height, 893,395. Sats per dollar, 1,146. Market cap, 1.73 trillion. Bitcoin versus gold market cap, 7.2%. Percentage issued, 94.54%. Decline from all-time high, -20. Realized monetary inflation, 0.84%. In the grand scheme of things, we are just getting the party started. Anyways, some interesting back and forths between Trump and the Fed these last couple of weeks or so. I find it quite interesting. So Trump tweeted this, I think it was like last week or so. He said the ECB is expected to cut interest rates for the 7th time, and yet, quote, too late. Jerome Powell of the Fed, who is always too late and wrong, yesterday issued a report which was another and typical complete mess. Oil prices are down, groceries are down, and the USA is getting rich on tariffs. Too late should have lowered interest rates like the ECB long ago, but he should certainly lower them now. Powell's termination cannot come fast enough. I responded with, Trump blocked the Fed from regulating the Bitcoin industry. The Fed wants a CBDC to ensure its survival. So do the Democrats. The Fed also helped Kamala's campaign. At this point, is it really a stretch to say the Fed is purposely working against Trump's agenda? I tweeted this out April 17th, and it's interesting. Trump followed up with this morning. He said preemptive cuts in interest rates are being called by many. With energy costs way down, food prices, including Biden's egg disaster, substantially lower, and most other things trending down, there is virtually no inflation. With these costs trending so nicely downward, just what I predicted they would do, there can almost be no inflation. But there could be a slowing of the economy unless Mr. Too Late, a major loser, lowers interest rates. Now, Europe has already lowered them 7 times. Powell has always been too late, except when it came to the election period when he lowered in order to help sleepy Joe Biden, later Kamala, get elected. How did that work out? Now, what I said was, look, we essentially how it's promoted to us is that the Federal Reserve is an independent institution. It's not supposed to be political, but it has acted in a very political fashion. It's helping certain political candidates and working against other political candidates. Here's Zero Hedge, and he has a little infographic, and he's just showing what Trump is talking about. So looser, tighter Fed cuts, election. Powell cut them multiple times heading into the election after Trump gets elected. We know what Trump has been saying about the Federal Reserve. He keeps bringing up the year over and over again, 1913, the year that the federal income tax was established, also the year that the Federal Reserve was established. He keeps bringing up this year, and all of a sudden, Powell is, being responsible and doesn't want to cut rates, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, Svetski, and a lot of your writings, you've talked a lot about central banking as an institution, specifically the book, I think it was Communist Manifesto. And you were talking about the 5th tenet of the Communist Manifesto. And I believe the 5th tenet, if my memory serves me correctly, was the necessity of the centralization of credit. Like, that was a necessity in order for that form of collectivism to work. So is it really surprising that the Central Bank of the United States is acting in a political manner? It's actually almost acting out of self-preservation in a way, and how it is currently in the United States. And we've been covering this for you guys for the last year or so. It seems like it's politically divided, right? So there was a vote in the House last year where essentially it would forbid the federal government from launching a central bank digital currency, and it was literally across party lines, right? Seems like the Republicans, or the right side, the right side of the aisle, voted for the bill that would ban the federal government from launching a CBDC. And then the left side of the aisle, not all of them, but 4 out of the 200 voted for the bill. The rest voted against the bill that would forbid the federal government from launching a CBDC. I see the CBDC as a continuation of the central bank, the central banking system. They see it as that as well. So does it surprise me at all that the first pro-Bitcoin president is essentially not getting along with the Federal Reserve? And if that's the case, we always get pitched this idea about democracy. And I know Svetski is a huge fan of democracy. Democracy this, democracy that. We can't elect the chair of the Fed. In fact, we can't even fire him. So if we don't elect him directly, if we can't fire him directly, and he has this godlike power of essentially being able to control, manipulate the rules of money, as people that get pitched on this idea of democracy, that doesn't sound very democratic to me. Svetski, what are your thoughts, while keeping in mind that we are on YouTube?
Yes. You know me, I'm always going to try and give a different spin on things. So let's go back to the creation of the Federal Reserve. I think the idea of separating the banking institution from the government is actually not an entirely bad idea, I think, originally, because the idea was sort of similar to separation of money and state. Separation of church and state, sort of like give these institutions different power and different authority, different responsibility. And I think one of the things that's very easy to forget is that Bitcoin didn't exist 100 years ago. Gold did. And gold failed in its role as money. Not so much because we just decided to get off the gold fucking standard. It's that, you know, gold is not a great form of money in a world becoming more high tech and fast paced, right? So over the last 100 years, technology made the world smaller and faster. They're two things that happened. And what had to happen with that was the money being used needed to also become faster, lighter, and able to move around quicker. And you know, that's sort of the genesis of paper money, etc. And then you sort of leads to the genesis of fiat money. And in many ways, fiat money is kind of a deal with the devil, right? You sign this deal. America in particular got the best part of the deal that it signed with the devil, which is it gave it the ability to export inflation. You know, people have been talking about, oh, US is going to go into hyperinflation for fucking decades now, and it hasn't. And that's not because the US hasn't printed money, but it's because faith in the US as an institution that can back its promise has remained. Now, these things are starting to unravel now, but in no way, you know, does the US dollar go into hyperinflation at any point in time. The challenge now is that we're entering a new age. So there's a philosopher I really like called Spengler. What the hell is his first name? I keep forgetting his first name, but his surname is Spengler, and he was the OG philosopher on cycles, on cycle theory. You know, a lot of Bitcoiners talk about, you know, the whole strong men, weak men, you know, good times, bad times, etc. But all of that kind of thinking came from Spengler fundamentally. I mean, it obviously has, it's a theme all throughout history, but Spengler did the work the greatest when he wrote Decline of the West about 100 and something years ago. And I consulted a lot of Spengler's work when I was writing Bushido of Bitcoin. And in there, he talks about the different ages of the West. So you sort of had this Apollonian age, which was the age of the Greeks and the Romans and all that sort of stuff. And they had a set of values, and the money actually mapped to those values. Then you had the Magian age, which was sort of like the Middle Ages. And then about 300, 400, 500 years ago, we entered the Faustian age, which was the age of no limits, the age of man, Western man in particular, being able to, break through every single physical limitation through technology, through ingenuity, through innovation, through all this sort of stuff, like the idea that there is no limits. And you look at what fiat money is, it's fundamentally a reflection of that Faustian model of the world, or framework, or that Faustian spirit. And that comes with a lot of positives. What it doesn't do, though, is it doesn't take into account the cost of the idea of unlimited, right? And when you don't take into account the cost, what ends up happening is that the bill comes due at some point. And I think that's the stage that we're at. And I believe we're moving into a new stage. And there's a great writer on Substack. He's not a Bitcoiner, although I know he owns some Bitcoin. His name is, I think his name actually is Alex, but he goes by Tree of Woe on Substack. And he wrote an article a couple months ago called The Dawn of the Aenean Age. And the Aenean Age is this idea that is sort of progress, but bounded by real physical constraints. So it's like the understanding that, hey, there is gravity and we can't just fucking ignore it, but we need to use it in our to our advantage, but sort of respect it, right? And Bitcoin is very Aenean, if that's the idea. It's this idea that, hey, we can build, we can create, we can do all this sort of stuff, but there's a cost to things and there's some limitations, right? Bitcoin famously is limited to 21 million coins and all this sort of thing. So where I'm going with this is, I think the central bank was part of what had to happen. We had to go through all of this. There was no way for us to go from gold to Bitcoin. We had to go through the experience of gold failing. We had to go through the expansion and evolution of fiat, the decoupling from gold, the continual expansion to the point where we are now, which is there's a price to be paid for all of these things. And now you have there's two paths ahead of us. There's the path which is this continual ignorance of reality, which is the path of the decrepit and decayed Faustian man, the one who thinks that they can print to infinity. And to do that, one must rape and pillage and consume everything you have left. And one of the tools of doing that is by extending the central bank into everything. And the way to do that is with a CBDC. And then at the same time, there's this new rising spirit, the Aenean spirit, that says, no, we can't just do that, because if we do that, this is sort of the boomers, right? Like, if we do that, we will destroy everything that our future generations need to subsist. So this sort of new A&E and energy is coming up, which is very conservative. It's very right wing. It's very conservative. It's very, it's got the ability to say no to things and says, no, fuck you, fuck the boomers, fuck this sort of unhinged Faustian spirit, which played its role at the time, but now has come to the end of its cycle. And now it's time to pay the piper, and we have to pay for it. So we will not do it anymore. And this is sort of in line with the rise of Bitcoin and the rise of, character, this sort of push for gender roles, free speech, all this sort of stuff that makes the world a little bit more conservative and a little bit more right-leaning. So to sum it up, I think, yes, the CBDC is a push for maintaining the central banking status quo. I think that is a bunch of people who know that their time is up and that they want to extract everything they can out of the system that is left and decaying. And then there's those of us on the other end, which is we realize we can think a little bit further than our generation because we're not dying in the next 10 years. We're going to live on. And we are also thinking about our children. And we're saying, no, fuck you. And we're pushing against that. And I think this is the real fight at this point. And Bitcoin is one of the most important tools, but it's not the only tool. We'll talk about that later. But that's
No. And I agree with you as well, Svetski. And I think that's a really important aspect of it. And we're going to be talking about that during the culture. And I see where you're leading with that, right? So yes, Bitcoin is very powerful, but it's also about, who are you as a person? What are your principles? What are your ideals? What are you willing to stand up for? What do you, how is it how you look at the world? Because a lot of the reasons as to why we got here isn't just broken money itself. You can make an argument. It's people's character. It's people's actions, right? So, I think that Bitcoiners are going to be some of the most wealthiest and influential people in the next 10, 15 years. And if that is the case, we will have the ability to influence the world for many generations to come. But I think a lot of Bitcoiners are not as much anymore. But I would say about a year ago or 2 years ago, there was so much tribalism. It was, people were, essentially fighting on the internet. And, me and Opti went back and forth on this. It's like, you guys, do you understand what's on the table? Like, this is Bitcoiner slavery. But when we win, when we are the ones that, have the influence of, institutions like the fiat institutions of today, like the World Economic Forum, when it's essentially the Bitcoiners that, have the most influence around the world, what type of world is that? What type of world do we want to live in? What principles are we going to have? So I definitely want to go back to that topic, Svetski, and that was a really good take. Opti, what's your take on this real quick? We'll move on to the news and then we'll hit the culture.
Yeah, well, I'm super excited to talk with Svetski and the culture about all this stuff. So I'm going to kind of go into like the Trump Powell stuff. So I have been kind of going down the rabbit hole of listening to a lot of, macro kind of Bitcoiners as well, just kind of trying to parse the information, like what exactly is going on. I know one of the main theories right now is that Trump's trying to get Powell in line. And I don't know, maybe I'm getting bearish on that narrative. And I think what we're seeing here, and I'm not like, this isn't an original idea here, but what I think we're seeing here is more of like a planned demolition of, the powers that be. And what Trump and Powell are doing is more like theater. And what they're really trying to do is weaken the dollar so that they can, refinance all their debt and so that they can maintain their position in power. And so as much as I do like this theory of like, Trump's trying to get the Federal Reserve under control and end the Fed and stuff, I think that is kind of playing into our hopes of what we want to happen. And in reality, what most people aren't seeing is like, if you look at a lot of different macro factors, they're really trying to weaken the dollar so that they can maintain their power. And I think a lot of this theater that we're seeing is essentially, Trump giving Jerome Powell an excuse to do what he needs to do right now. And so it's hard to tell who's actually in control and, where the misdirection is coming from. But I think what the point is here is what Svetski said in the beginning of that conversation there is that we are seeing essentially a point in time where they need to have a monetary reset. Like they realize that, hey, the jig is up. We need to change things. And how can we do this in a controlled way so things don't blow up? And I think that's a stronger narrative, or at least a stronger direction of what us Bitcoiners understand. It's like everyone's been saying for a while, like we all know where this road ends. They have to print a bunch of money. They have to continue to do what they're doing, but can they do it in a way where they don't lose all of their wealth? I think this is what we're seeing, because if things blow up in a way that is not controlled, all the people in power are going to be absolutely wrecked, and they're never going to destroy their own bags. And so as Bitcoiners here, we understand Bitcoin as an escape valve. We understand like this is the safety belt, et cetera, et cetera. We say it constantly, but a lot of people don't understand what's going on, and that's also by design. But I think the people in key positions understand what's going on. And this is why we're starting to see moves going into gold. And of course, like the Larry Finks of the world going into Bitcoin, is because people are trying to position themselves in a way right now where they're like, okay, if we're going to monetary reset, if things are going to blow up, let's make sure that, you know, we maintain our wealth. And I think that is more in line and in the right direction here. But obviously, you know, we can only really kind of see what they're doing by their actions. But I'm starting to lean more. This is a controlled demolition of the monetary system as we know it. And we're entering into a new era. And of course, we constantly bring up CBDCs as well, because there is a faction trying to go to CBDCs. And then there's seemingly a faction that's trying to go into Bitcoin, or maybe, you know, a distraction of using Bitcoin to go into gold. So there's a lot of uncertainty going on, but I'm starting to lean towards more of a like monetary reset, and the powers that be, you know, the people in positions of power, they understand that this is coming, and they're trying to figure out a way to do this without, you know, blowing everything up. And for us, it's essentially the same thing. Just like keep stacking Bitcoin. We know here where the end goal is. We know who's going to win at the end. But in the meantime, things can get absolutely crazy. And we'll talk about ways to position yourself and the mentality you need in the culture. So I'll stop ranting. Let's go to the next segment, Nico.
Absolutely. Guys, before I move on, I do want to give a shout out to the live stream. 2,700 of you guys watching live, 500 alone on YouTube. If you guys are enjoying the live stream so far, make sure to smash that like button. We still have a ton of content. We're going to be talking about potentially $500,000 Bitcoin. Stefan Livera and Samson Mow, we're talking about that at the Plan B Forum in El Salvador. We have the clip lined up for you guys. We're going to be discussing that with Svetski, who's joining us on the show today. And then during the culture segment, we're going to be talking about Svetski's book, The Bushido of Bitcoin, a code of virtue for a world on a new economic standard. We broke past our goal of 150 likes. Help us break 200 likes by the first 50 minutes of the show. So if you guys are enjoying the show so far, make sure to smash that like button. Anyways, let's get to the news segment. We have tons to talk about. We will be right back in just a second. I want to give a shout out to our sponsor, Casa. Casa makes self-custody easy and secure. As a Bitcoiner, I care about holding my own private keys, but multi-sig can sometimes get tricky. Casa nails it with a multi-key security. So even if one key gets lost or stolen, your Bitcoin stays safe. And you don't give up custody, meaning no one could access your Bitcoin but you. No seed phrase anxiety, no single point of failure. I've been telling my friends and family about Casa for years. Their UX and UI on their app is by far the best in the industry. Inheritance planning is built in, and they even offer Casa for Business if you're thinking about a Bitcoin treasury. Hit up casa.io today and use promo code SIMPLY to get 10% off Casa Standard or Casa Premium. Head over to casa.io. I want to give a shout out to our partner, CoinKite. If you take your Bitcoin security seriously, you'll need the best Bitcoin hardware wallet on the market to take self-custody. That's where Cold Card comes in. The Cold Card Q is the most advanced Bitcoin signing device ever made. It's got a full keyboard, larger screen, and NFC support, making air-gap signing easier than ever. It's built for power users who want the ultimate security without sacrificing usability. And if you're looking for a battle-tested, uncompromising cold storage, the Cold Card MK4 is your go-to with PSPT signing, an industrial-grade secure element, and USB-C. It's the perfect blend of security and convenience. Both devices are, of course, 100% Bitcoin only, open source, and built by Bitcoiners for Bitcoiners. Secure your Bitcoin the right way with the Cold Card Q and the MK4. Head over to coldcard.com today and use promo code SIMPLY to get 5% off anything on the store. All right, everybody, here's Opti. Opti's holding the best hardware wallet in the game, the Cold Card Q, which you can use promo code simply to get 5% off anything on the coldcard.com store. You can check out the MK4 or the Q. These are the best hardware wallets in the industry. Scan the QR code to find out more information. Anyhow, let's open up the conversation. I have a clip lined up for you guys of Samson Mow and Stefan Livera talking 500K Bitcoin. Let's check it out, and then we'll talk about it.
Yeah, you definitely didn't have any of the catalysts we have now. You didn't have nation states adopting. You didn't have talk of a strategic Bitcoin reserve. You don't have presidents talking about it. You don't have countries adopting it. And you don't have ETFs. You didn't have ETFs back then. So the game has completely changed. So going back to the predictions, I think everyone wants to play it safe and be the reasonable guy. We'll pick something safe, right? It's up there and it's reasonable. But the thing you have to look at is when you get to 200, close your eyes and imagine Bitcoin is 200 now. What's the world look like? It's a very different world. I mean, 2 trillion, 4 trillion. Now let's say Bitcoin is at 500K. Again, imagine the world. What does it look like? Would people be selling? So at 500, we're almost halfway to gold market cap. And I think at that point, I call it the Veblen threshold. So, you know, Veblen goods, it's the more expensive it is, the more people want it. Right.
So, I mean, what do you guys think? All this talk of 500K, 200K, you know, $1 million Bitcoin. I'm starting to agree with the chat. You know, a month ago or two, I was with Opti. I was like, yeah, you know, 500K at the end of the year. Now I'm agreeing with all the comments, right? You know, let's get back to 100K first. So I'm going to pass it on to Svetski. Svetski, what's your take, man? Are there diminishing returns? Are Bitcoin's best days behind it? You know, is Bitcoin boring? Is it like the S&P? Is there still an opportunity here, Svetski?
I mean, come on. Like, isn't this statistically Bitcoin goes up in like most of Bitcoin's gains, like 80% of the gains are like in 15 days of the year, isn't that right? Or
something like that. I think it's 12 days or 20 days. I forget what it is.
It's like 10 days. It's like 10 days out of the 365, something like that.
Yeah, I mean, this ties back to all the shit that we said earlier about how we're all just desensitized and we all just want shit now, or a bunch of children. Like, fucking, it'll happen. Just relax. And in fact, you know, Opti said earlier, it's like maximum pain, you know, going sideways. I don't actually think we've gone sideways enough for them to be maximum pain yet. Like, you know, the fact that we're still only at the stage of, oh, well, let's just get to 100. There's still the underlying assumption that we're going to get to 100. That needs to go away. Like, people need to be like, oh, fuck, I hope it doesn't get to 20 before there's maximum pain, before this thing pumps. I don't know. Like, is that right? Like, imagine
no, it's 100% right.
Imagine we drop to 50. Motherfuckers start jumping off bridges, then we know we're about to
No, 58K. Yeah, I might be on a live watch for sure. If we got a 58K again, Dennis, do not bring us to 58K again.
Look, we as soon as we all start applying for McDonald's jobs again, that's when the Bitcoin price goes up. Until then, shit's going sideways.
Yeah, I agree. Maximum pain. You can't avoid it. If you've been in Bitcoin long enough, you understand this. It's like a fact of life. It's Mother Nature. It's Mother Bitcoin. I don't know. Opti, what's your take on this, my friend?
Yeah, well, first off, I do find it hilarious, and I think I've been saying this all last week. Like, I find it super funny that we're at 87K right now, that we're all like, it's over, boys. Like, this was a good run. You know, we're never gonna hit 100K. Like, 87K forever. And you know what? We were here less than a couple of months ago and we were super hyped about that. And now we're like, yo, it's over. And I think it really kind of goes back to Svetski's point of like time dilation. The longer you're in Bitcoin, the longer you stay at a certain price point, you do start to feel like, oh, it's over. It's never going to start running again. But again, like Svetski was saying, statistically speaking, Bitcoin makes its incredible gains in a very short time frame. And here we are going into 2025. I know there's a lot of hopium going out there. There's a lot of price predictions. We have probably the most bullish news cycle ever, and yet like the price isn't doing anything. And a lot of people are feeling like a bear market, because usually in a bear market, no amount of good news will move the price, but a tiny bad news story will dump the price. And we're kind of in this scenario where like no amount of good news is going to make this price start to pump, and we're all like, what's going on here? But I think you want to jump in, Svetski?
No, I was gonna say, but here's the thing: do we think people are at despair? So, like, do you think there's
No.
more hopium, or do you think there's more despair? Because that's the trigger.
Way
It's like
more
if
hope. I think we're still in hopium. Like,
Okay,
we're still in
Yeah,
hopium.
so until that changes, like, there's got to be more despair. So in that case, maybe it's not even a dump. Maybe maximum despair comes from maximum sideways, and that it's like, this kind of people tearing their hair out saying, fuck, it's not, it's, Sailor bought more and it's not going up. Sailor bought more, it's not going up, until, people really fucking freak out. And, that whole Wojak meme, where he's like crying behind the smile, that sort of thing. That's got to happen before this bitch goes anywhere, man. I'm telling you. Like, I'm actually, here is the one chart and the only statistic that people should care about with the Bitcoin price is where on the App Store is Coinbase ranked.
Let's go.
That's it. And at the moment, Coinbase is ranked somewhere in like 300, 350 or some shit. That means it's actually good accumulation time, because less and less of the fucking normies care. Soon as it's almost like clockwork. During the 108 pump, Coinbase was hitting, number 2, number 3, number 4 on the App Store. And that tells me that, it's obviously overhyped, over froth. So I think the accurate position right now is that we are going to have to, like, all of these noobs that have come in the last year. And I mean, I see this slop on Twitter these days, which is why I can't be on there anymore. But, people like predicting MicroStrategy going to go to $2,000, all these fucking monkeys that came to make money easy. Like, they have got to be ground out like fucking mincemeat. And once they've all jumped off a bridge, then we can continue.
Metaphorically, right, Nico?
Metaphorically, yeah. Metaphorically.
All right, yeah, I think I totally agree. Like, to that last point, until we're starting to see, the most bullish people start to feel the pain, then that's like when the whale triggers the pump and we start pumping. But there is something I want to say with the Samson Mow clip that I do find interesting. Maybe I have a kind of different take. Like, we lost Nico. That internet over there. Yeah.
Nico went to jump off a bridge. Sorry.
Metaphorically. Samson Mow basically said at like 200K Bitcoin price, like, the world is fundamentally different. I don't think I necessarily believe that per se. Like, yes, we'll be more bullish, but like a 2x from 100 from our last all-time high, like, I don't think the world's fundamentally different. Like, at a 500K Bitcoin, then it's really like, okay, things are fundamentally changing here. So like, I don't think we are going to see a 200K Bitcoin really change the mind of too many people. I think that's like the starting point where things are going to get really frothy and people are going to be like, oh my gosh, I need to buy this Bitcoin thing. You'll see the Coinbase app rankings start to be like number 1. That's when like the real FOMO starts to kick in at like 150, 200K. And that's when things will start to get crazy. I don't necessarily believe that's like fundamentally a different time than where we are right now. Like, yes, it'll be a little frothier. There'll be a lot more excitement in the air. But once we get to like 500,000 coin, that's when we're really going to be, as Bitcoiners, like, oh, this is fundamentally different. Like, things are changing. This Bitcoin thing, all of our theories are playing out. Like, every Bitcoin hypothesis you ever probably had, all your hopium is like at max extreme greed here. But at 200K, like a 2x from here or whatever it is, 2.5 from here, like, I don't think things change too much. Like, it's not too much of a drastic change here. But once we start moving into like the mid 6 figures, that's when, as Bitcoiners and everyone, will be like, oh, I need to get some of this Bitcoin thing. This thing is not dying. Why did I miss out on all these gains? So that's like my little different take here.
So you think that's what Samson was talking about? You think like where he was like, oh, it like starts to become like this like luxury good that like everybody wants, et cetera, et cetera.
I mean, look at, like, literally last week, guys, Nico's making fun of me about my truck because it's a beater. Like, I don't care about social status stuff.
I love your truck, Opti.
Yeah, whatever. He's pulling back. Like, I don't really care about social status stuff. To me, the only thing that matters is Bitcoin. And I think once people start to get into the Bitcoiner mindset of like, do I really want a Lambo or do I just want, as much Bitcoin as possible? Then that Veblen good idea does start to kick in. This has been an idea that Bitcoiners have been throwing around for a long time, that what people are missing is Bitcoin is a Veblen good. As the price goes up, people want it more. And this, like being a Bitcoiner will be the quote unquote like new social status phenomenon. And I think this is like the perfect segue to go into the culture and talk about the Bushido of Bitcoin. So play the ad, Nico.
Let's do it. All right, guys, we're gonna talk to Svetski about his book. We'll be right back in just a second.
I want to give a shout out to our partner, HIVE Digital Technology. Why HIVE in 2025?
unstoppable growth. As the first ever public miner, HIVE's position to quadruple their global footprint, making them one of the world's fastest growing miners in 2025. And with elite operations that consistently top the industry in Bitcoin mined per exahash, HIVE's now headquartered in the USA. They're lean and mean, they're green and clean, and they're rewriting the playbook on sustainable Bitcoin mining. You can catch the latest buzz at HIVE Digital Tech or at hivedigitaltech.com. Need liquidity without having to sell your Bitcoin? For more than 6 years now, Ledn has been the trusted choice for Bitcoin-backed lending with transparency, security, and trust at their core. I absolutely love these guys, and I personally not only have an account with them, but also a loan. And some of the key features that I love about Ledn is the fact that there are no monthly payments. You pay at the end of the term. You also have the ability to roll over the loan as well, and you can pay it back whenever you want. Essentially what they do is that they help their clients unlock the liquidity of their BTC, allowing you to hodl while still accessing the wealth of your Bitcoin. They've been battle tested with their focus on transparency, security, and trust, allowing them to build a proven track record of client success and security, helping tens of thousands of clients harness the value of their digital assets with confidence and peace of mind. Learn more about what your BTC can do for you today. Simply Bitcoin viewers get 0.25% off their first loan by using the link in the video/podcast description. What are you waiting for? Head over to ledn.io today. All right, everybody, we are back. We got Svetski in the house, and we're going to be talking about his book. You can buy it on Amazon right now. Search The Bushido of Bitcoin, a code of virtue for a world on a new economic standard. Opti.
Yeah, so I think diving in, I think the last time you were on, we kind of did the TLDR. So I want to kind of dive into more of like the main ideas of the book so that people get excited to talk about it. And we were kind of talking about it a minute ago. It's this idea of, you know, the culture, I guess, for lack of better terms, of being a Bitcoiner. If we are going to be the new elites, are we recreating the fiat system? And one of the main points that I got, Svetski, is this idea that you keep doubling down on this is like, you need both capital and character in where we're going in this new era. And Bitcoin is not enough. Like Bitcoin alone is not enough. You kind of talked about that earlier. So like, what are these, you know, other virtues? What are these other tools that Bitcoiners need to, you know, build to actually usher in the world that we talk about constantly as Bitcoin, or, you know, the Bitcoin standard, et cetera?
So, okay. I find myself consistently interested in what's next. And I think that's part of why I found Bitcoin, and part of what attracted me to Bitcoin specifically is because Bitcoin is what's next. I don't know if this is arrogant or naive or whatever, but I do think that Bitcoin has won the economic game, even though it's, you know, obviously it's still unclear, and, you know, we haven't hit 100 grand yet, and there's people on suicide watch because it hasn't hit, you know, 250K yet or whatever. But like, I do think that, you know, it's over for the other. Like, Bitcoin differentiated itself enough from shitcoin now. I think the absolute battle that we waged over the last couple of years, kind of like separating it, has worked. Honestly, I think people start to think of Bitcoin now as this store of value or as this reserve asset, and they're treating it very differently, and that's reflected in the rise of the Sailors of the world and the balance sheets that you know, companies that are holding Bitcoin have now, and all this sort of stuff. No one's going to have Ethereum on their fucking balance sheet. And, you know, it's even reflected in the, you know, the relative price of every other shitcoin compared to Bitcoin. Like I don't think we've seen dominance this high for a while now, actually, since the last bear market. You know, we're kind of like mid bull, and the dominance is higher than it is during a standard bear market. So in my opinion, that part, like the heavy part, the part where Bitcoin might have died, or it might have been beaten by something else, or it might have faded off into obscurity, I think that part's done. I think the next thing now is, I mean, you know, Bitcoin will have its own technical battles and all of that sort of stuff. But for me, it's what becomes of the world once there's a subset of people who, related to what Samson said earlier, is like Bitcoin's at 500,000, Bitcoin's at 1 million, Bitcoin's at 5 million, Bitcoin's at 10 million. The people holding the Bitcoin, who do they become? Like, how do they show up? And, I've been saying this for a little while, and it's pissed some people off. I think people are sort of slowly coming around to the idea of this sort of the pleb moniker. I've never been a fan of it. And the more Bitcoin goes up, the less I'm a fan of it, because when you are in a position of, like when you hold an extreme amount of wealth, what comes with that is a responsibility and a power. And in fact, power and responsibility are inextricably linked. The people who have power but don't carry the responsibility for their power, they become parasites, right? People who have power and then carry the burden or the responsibility to channel that power into a direction that is helpful to their people, the world, their family, all this sort of stuff that matters. Those people do good in the world, right? And I think today we have an epidemic of people who have power but take no responsibility and have poor character, right? And when I was writing the book, one of the things I noticed was that a lot of early Bitcoiners are actually, degenerates and shitcoiners. There's this sort of whole thing about, oh yeah, Bitcoin fixes you and it changes you and all this sort of stuff. And I have found that is not entirely true. In fact, it's true for a small subset of people, but it's actually holding a lot of Bitcoin, particularly in the early days, seems to have distorted more people for the worse, not for the better, right? And that was counter to what I hypothesized when I first started writing the book. When I first started writing the book, the aim of the book was to write about the Bushido of Bitcoin, this emergent code of virtue that was happening amongst Bitcoiners. And then when I started digging in, I realized, well, wait a minute, more people, like 80% of people who hold Bitcoin are fuckwits, and 20% of people are actually, double down on good virtues. So what I came to realize is that people's nature actually mattered a lot. And that was very hard for me to contend with, because I've always been a person who thought, okay, look, people can be trained or nurtured in a particular direction. And I guess COVID taught us all that there's actually more NPCs. I saw a funny tweet actually the other day. It said, the older I get, the more I'm convinced that there's only 150,000 souls on the planet. The implication there is that everyone's a fucking NPC. And I don't know, it's a joke, but it's, within every joke, there's some truth. So anyway, to tie it back to the book, the whole point of the book is, look, if we want to build a better civilization and we want to move towards in an ascendant direction, what do we need to value in order to do that? And I took inspiration and I took lessons from the great civilizations of the past and what they did to get to their peak. And those civilizations include the Romans, the Greeks, the Japanese, the Christian West, and all this sort of stuff. And what I found was this overlap of values and virtues amongst the leadership classes of their time, right? And the leadership classes back then were the aristocracy, the nobility, and the warrior classes. And they all, irrespective of time and place, had this sort of overlap. And that's what the book is. That's what the core of the book is. It's a look at what are those 10 virtues that we need to start to adopt and build now. Because the thing is, if Bitcoin pops to 10 million tomorrow, let's just hypothetically say that, I don't think many people who hold Bitcoin today have the character necessary to bear the weight of that kind of increase in wealth. I actually think more people than not would become degenerates. Like, you get ultra fucking rich overnight. It kind of fries you, you know what I mean? Like, people say, oh, money just amplifies what you already are. That's mostly true. I think that's 90% true. But it also, like, a very quick influx of money. This is why people who win the lottery, right? Even if they were good people before and all this sort of stuff, it like fucking warps them, right? So the lucky thing we have about Bitcoin is that it's not going to go to 10 million tomorrow. Like, it's going to take a little bit of time. And my suggestion, my offer, my challenge, whatever you want to call it, my call to action to everybody is, let's take the time now while we have it to develop the elements of character that are necessary to bear the burden of greater wealth. And when we can do that, hopefully we can channel that greater wealth towards greater ends in the long term, because for damn sure the world needs it, and I hope that we can do something about it. So that's an overview.
No, and it's excellent, man. And something that we've said on Simply too is it's not just about changing the money. I think it was the Breitbart quote that really resonated with me when I first started making media, which is politics is downstream from culture, right? And what I see in this book is it's a cultural phenomenon, man. You're basically saying like, look, like, this is how you should live. Like, these principles that have existed throughout human history, in fact, they are important. Integrity is important. Having character is important. These aren't things that, like in the modern era, I feel like they've just been forgotten, right? And look at where we are in today's world, right? So, yeah, I think that this is extremely, you have to highlight this, man, because if not, okay, you have all the money, you have the influence, you have the power, but the world could end up exactly where it is today. You can even make the argument that it actually could end up in an even worse place than it is today if you don't have the integrity that goes along with it. And I think this book holds it up. I mean, it's in the name, right? What does Bushido mean in Japanese, Svetski?
Yeah, before I say that, you just made me think of something. And I want to bring this up. Is a lot of people think Bitcoin's going to equalize the world. I don't think so. In fact, I think Bitcoin's going to move us back to more of a feudal structure. And honestly, if we dig further in this idea, it's something I explore in the book. I think we actually still live in a very feudal world. In fact, so long as human beings exist, so long as differences exist, so long as the material and the nature of man varies, which it does. There's no sort of getting around that. And you want that, actually, because you want different people for different things, right? That's the only way you get actual, real, functional diversity in the world. As long as all of that stuff exists, you will have a layered society. And that's not a bad thing. I think what we have today is we have a blind feudal system, which is this sort of, we are feudal, but we have a new class of serfs, we have a new class of slaves, we have a new class of artisan, we have a new class of, all this sort of shit, like, the central bankers and everything at the top, right? But we've been fed this lie that we're all equal and that we're all on the same page, that we all have a vote and all this sort of stuff, but it's one big fucking scam. I would argue that prior feudal systems were a little bit more evident, a little bit more clear, probably also a little bit more rigid, which is, maybe arguably why they broke down a little bit. I spoke about this a little bit in the Uncommunist Manifesto, the idea of like meritocratic, like moving towards a meritocracy. My thoughts have changed a little bit on that, even over the last couple of years. I'd say we're probably going to, Bitcoin will kind of move the world more towards meritocratic feudalism. But here's the catch with that, because nothing is perfect and nothing is always just good. Everything comes with a trade-off. The older I fucking get, the more I realize that the most important saying and the most important lesson that I, for example, want to impart on my children is pick your poison. Everything has a cost. If you want to be fit and healthy and have a six-pack and all this sort of shit, your price is going to be discipline, going to the gym, eating well, and doing all that sort of stuff. If you don't want to pay that price, you're just going to pay another price later, which is you're going to be fat, sick, lazy, all this other shit, right? So everything has a price. You want to hold Bitcoin, the price is going to be going through the ups and downs and all that kind of shit. You want to have Bitcoin later, the price is going to be fucking figure out privacy so you don't get kidnapped or fucking shot or, get taxed out the asshole or whatever, right? Everything is going to have a price, or everything does have a price. Like, trying to ignore that is moronic and it's childish. So the price of Bitcoin winning is a restructuring of the civilizational order. And I think it will create more visible feudal hierarchies, and the people who are more in power in those feudal hierarchies are going to be necessarily the ones who can wield greater power and greater influence. How do you wield greater power and greater influence? Well, you have more Bitcoin. So therefore, if you are going to be in that kind of structure and you're going to be higher up in the list, are you going to be a parasite aristocrat, or are you going to be a noble? And a noble is a very important word. So the nobles all throughout history, they held the king and the royalty to account, and they also acted as a voice for the people, right? And funny enough, without getting into a whole discussion here, during the French Revolution and the introduction of communism and all this sort of stuff, it was the nobles that got killed off. That was the exact that was the linchpin of that. That's what held civilization together. And often the nobles were also the warrior class, right? Killed them off, and then everything else fucking fell apart because the royals had no voice anymore or relationship back to their people. They also lost power, they lost the protection, then everything fucking went to shit. So anyway, coming back to what you sort of said and why I wanted to explain this is knowing that we're going to have something more visibly feudal. I think it's even more important to recognize that in the feudal times, for example, the nobility were expected to behave in a particular way. They were expected to have integrity, to have noblesse obliged, to have a duty to their people, to have compassion, to be the purveyors of justice, to be responsible, to strive for excellence. All of these virtues that are in there. So the Bitcoin holders, that class of people, is going to represent that in modern civilization. And if they don't have those virtues, I fear that they will not be effective leaders, or they'll be poor role models for those who come afterwards. And it's very, very, it was common back then, it will be common now, to have people that are aristocratic or noble that are actually really bad versions of what that should be. So it doesn't take away from, like, just because you hold a bunch of Bitcoin doesn't mean you're going to be a fucking saint. Like, to be a saint requires that you work on yourself. So anyway, I'll shut up there. The really briefly, what Bushido means in Japanese is way of the warrior, and it's just become synonymous with the idea of a code of virtue, because it was the warriors who protected civilization and had the most power. It wasn't just who had the most money back then, it was who was able to wield violence the most, and that is the warrior class. So because they could, because they had so much power, they also developed the code so that they didn't reach beyond what was healthy for the organism that is a civilization. So that's what they developed it for. We're not going back to fucking swords and horses. So, the new noble class will channel power through other means. And I do believe a big part of that will be Bitcoin. Henceforth, we need a new Bushido, a new code of virtue for that class of people.
Beautiful, man. Beautiful. I absolutely love that. That's very, very powerful. Opti, you want to add to what Svetski was saying?
Yeah, well, actually, I just kind of want to segue that conversation into something else you told me before the show. And I know Nika loves this book, so might get a little spicy for a moment here. But you were saying essentially right there, it's not just about the strongman virtues and, being yourself as an individual, being, the best you can be, but it is also about building strong societies. And you have this theme of like the lone wolf fallacy. And you said it earlier today before the show that the sovereign individual is dead. Can you explain this to people? Because I know we quote sovereign individual constantly on this show. And I think this might be a good way to wrap up today's show.
Sure. So I've been toying with this idea for a little bit, and I wrote a little bit about it in the book, but not so explicitly, right? Because I talk, Sovereign Individual is a very impactful book for me, and I still think it's one of the best books ever written. I just question the idea of sovereign individual, first of all. I think, let's break this up into a few pieces. Number one, I think individualism is very dangerous. You can break a single stick very easily, but you put a bundle of them together, it's much harder to break. And I experienced this firsthand during COVID, for example, when I would get arrested on fucking planes for not putting my mask on. I got arrested 4 times, actually, in Turkey, in Brazil, in Costa Rica, and all these sort of places for refusing to put a mask on. And one thing I noticed was I was the only one doing it. I was the lone wolf, and I was Mr. Sovereign fucking individual, and they had more power over me. In the end, I mean, I didn't put my fucking mask on, but I did get thrown in a fucking police car and sent to a fucking room for 5 hours and all this sort of shit. So it was very inconvenient. Although I hope I made it inconvenient for them too. But what I realized was, imagine if there was like a couple rows on the plane of a bunch of dudes who all said "fuck you." What would they do? I think it would become very hard for them to have the same kind of power over you. So that kind of planted the seeds for me about this idea that, hey, individualism is a little bit too. This is where I think libertarians also fail. They think the correct unit of sovereignty is the individual. And I don't think that matters as much. I think it's much, the family, for example, is way more important than the individual. And then also the tribe, in my opinion, is more important than the family. There seems to be some point at which the larger the collective gets, that the reverse happens. The larger the collective gets, then it's actually the more local or the more community that becomes more important. And I don't know exactly where that is. So I've started toying with this term called like sovereign micro collectives. I don't know how big they are. Are they 150 people? Are they 1,000 people? What are they? I don't know exactly. But I'm pretty convinced that the idea of the sovereign individual is a big fucking scam. And that is one part of why, right? Is that you need that micro collective, and it certainly comes before the individual in terms of the order of importance. The second part, and I talked about this at a conference in Bulgaria last year, I said, look, sovereignty, the definition of the word sovereignty and what it implies, requires the ability to channel a very a large amount of power, right? There's no fucking individuals today that channel that much power. Maybe a couple, maybe Trump, right? Maybe Bukele, right? These sort of really strong individuals. There's no way, I don't give a shit how much Bitcoin you hold, that you're really a sovereign individual. Okay. Maybe 3 or 4 Bitcoiners in the world have enough power to sort of really roll with that. So I don't know if that's the right message or the right framing. Maybe autonomous is a better word. Sovereignty comes with a lot of baggage. To really be a sovereign, you need to be able to protect territory. Who the fuck are you as one person to be able to protect a large amount of territory and truly be sovereign? Which individual is going to go and negotiate with a state tomorrow? None of us. It's a fucking joke of an idea. But I get the metaphor. So my question here is do we replace the sovereign individual with sort of the autonomous individual and the sovereign collective? I don't know if there's something there. It's still an idea that I'm toying with. So I'll throw it back to you guys as a discussion point.
Yeah, so there's a fascinating discussion. So yeah, I think you can be individualistic, but if the society that you live in as a whole does not have your same principles, then you're just essentially painting a target on your back. You said something about libertarianism that I came to a realization a couple years ago, and I was telling my guys, I don't think you understand. Libertarianism is only viable, in the current kind of democratic system that we live in, which is between the left and the right. Is if the conservatives hold the line, then you can kind of have this libertarianism type of in the back, but the conservatives are really the ones that are just kind of holding the line between the left and the right aspect of it. So it really comes down to, I think, the society that you live in. So if you live in a society that has very similar ideals and principles to you, then, you actually won't get in trouble for not refusing to wear a mask, right? Some of the things that I really appreciate about the US is just the individual sovereignty between the states, right? As all you guys know, I'm from Florida, right? I think we had a week or 2 weeks where the masks were a thing. The rest of the time, it wasn't a thing. You could do whatever you want. It wasn't a problem, right? If you were in California, if you're in New York, same thing. You get thrown. They would close your business. They would persecute you. They would go after you. And it doesn't matter how individualistic you think you are, unless you live in a farm in the middle of nowhere. You're still beholden to the collective rules of that said society. So I agree with you, man. I think it's not only it's really about spreading the principles of individualism to the collective society as a whole, and them going along with that. And I think in order for that to happen, a strong family unit is at its core, rather than this kind of reliance on the state, the state worship. And I think a lot of the, like society in the last 50 years has moved away from the idea of the nuclear family, has moved away from one parent staying at home, providing while the other parent takes care of the kids. That has been demonized. That has been villainized. That has been attacked. And I think what's taken its place is, this kind of moral decay of society, and then with it, the rise of collectivism. And what's a really interesting phenomenon to me, Svetski, is what has happened in Europe. So, and I'll give you an example of this. The countries that essentially survived, the fall of the Berlin Wall, and the eastern side have actually become a lot more conservative, and the side of the western side has gone the complete opposite direction, right? So it's almost as if like they didn't burn their fingers on the stove, so to speak, and realize how bad things could get. And I think going back to El Salvador, one of the things that I love about El Salvador as someone who's Latin American is, you have this country, a relatively poor country in Central America, that respects private property rights, has very low corruption, and you can actually raise a family in. Is it perfect? No. But that's not the norm. What you usually see in that area is just total chaos. And I think the reason as to why El Salvador has moved towards this direction was a 30-year war. A 30-year war just completely woke up the collective consciousness to society and said, hey, guys, these principles are important. Private property is important. Family is important. Believing in a higher power is important. And those are things that I think have been forgotten in the West due to decadence, due to wealth, due to just things just being overly convenient. That's my take. Svetski, what's your opinion?
Yeah, I mean, convenience and comfort, yes. There's a whole section in the book called "Does Wealth Corrupt?" and I struggle with this question, because guess what's going to happen to Bitcoiners? They're going to become very wealthy. So do they fall into the same trap of becoming comfortable, weak, convenient, and then just be overrun and proliferate the same weak ideas, and then we're back to sort of square one, right? Because comfort does make you weak, and then if weak men bring about bad society, then one could make the argument that Bitcoin will bring about weak men and create a bad society. So then where the fuck are we there? Like, how do you square that circle? And Bitcoin will say, oh yeah, but there's a cost to making bad decisions and all this sort of stuff. And yeah, look, there's definitely truth to that. But it's not so simple, right? I would push back on what you said about Salvador in terms of a general consciousness and awakening. Maybe part of that happened. I think what really happened in Salvador is that a strong man stood up and said no, drew a fucking line, and acted as a beacon for people to get behind, right? And this is the importance of leadership, and this is also why, again, this whole sort of idea of like being a pleb and being a nobody and hiding and all this sort of shit, I don't entirely agree with. I think that people with the courage of a Bukele who hold Bitcoin have a duty to go and actually do something with their wealth and with their power. There was something else you mentioned about the collective and the individual. I think one of the other reasons Europe has decayed because it's gone ultra collectivist. But I think America has also got its problems because it was ultra individualist, and it's got a different flavor of problem. It seems like ultra collectivist is worse than ultra individualist, because I think the line at which, so if we say this is a spectrum and you got like maximum collectivism here and you got maximum individualism here, I think the right point for a civilization is probably somewhere here, where it's kind of like what I said, micro collectives, probably larger than the family. I think it's got to be like tribe, community, something like that, in the order of thousands of people. Has to be the most important unit. which is closer to the individual side, which is probably why America has less problems than a Europe, who has gone way too far on the extreme collectivism side. But I just, to tie back to that original point, it's like the sovereign individual. I think it's a bit of a naive frame, and I think my whole point here is that right now, the most important thing to do is build networks, connections of people who are not just like-minded. In fact, if you go for like-minded, you might find yourself in trouble. I think we need to go for like-valued, and it's a very important distinction. In fact, you probably want to go different-minded and like-valued. That's probably like the ideal fix, or the ideal mix, is you want to get people who think very differently, but who value something very similarly. And if you can combine those kind of people, you have the ability to push back because you have some sort of strength in numbers. I mean, it's funny, Bitcoiners always talk about, strength in numbers. Like it's in, various and numerous. It's like it's a standard saying, but we often get caught up, and I have disagreements with Knut about this. He's adamant that, it's the individual that matters most, because praxeologically speaking, you can only measure the individual, and human action starts with the individual. Sure, that's right. But in practical reality, that is nothing, because it's very easy to bump off an individual, but it's much harder to squash or subvert a collective who aligns around values where there's more than one individual. But it's interesting enough that collective needs leaders who are effectively individuals, and that leadership structure needs to have some level of hierarchy associated to it so that it is more robust. So anyway, I guess this is a way of saying that the older I get, the more I realize that, whether it's libertarian talking points, whether it's, sovereign individual talking points, Bitcoin talking points, things aren't as simple in the real world. Things are way more messy. And I did my best in the book to try and contend with all of these competing ideas, because it's not so simple. Things are not so fucking simple, and things are not so easy, and they're not so straightforward. And in order to navigate all of this stuff over the coming decade too, which is really when the world is going to shift. Like Bitcoin's going to make its biggest rise between now and 2040. That range. We've got like 15 years where the whole fucking world is going to change in a big way. And we now have to prepare for being the vanguard of that change. And I just don't think anyone's thinking enough about it. So I do hope that what I wrote will fire up some of these, fire up some of the people that are going to hold this stuff, and like make them think more long-term about all this shit.
Absolutely. Guys, go check out The Bushido of Bitcoin, written by Svetski. It's on Amazon right now. I'm going to drop it in the YouTube chat. I just bought myself a hard copy. Opti put me on the spot. Beautiful, beautiful book. And, Alex is a good friend of mine. Appreciate you joining us today. Guys, if you enjoyed today's show, smash that like button. Consider subscribing if you feel like what we did provided you value. Love you all, and we'll see you tomorrow for a brand new episode. Take care, everybody.
Today's episode was brought to you by BitcoinWell.com, a Bitcoin-only platform on a mission to enable financial independence.